The war had ended 1,000 years ago, yet somehow the starfield still wore their scars. There were places where light moved wrong, where soundless shockwaves lived on as tremors in the vacuum, where dead worlds glowed like burned bones. Humanity had crossed those haunted lanes anyway, not because it was strongest or purest, but because it refused to stop. They found him adrift among that wreckage. An ancient colonial ark split open like a rib cage, its cryopods frost-blind and full of quiet. In one of them a human heart still ticked, stubborn as a metronome. The Xathari research cruiser Luminous Path reeled the capsule in with gloved precision, thawed what was left with patient heat, and met a pair of waking eyes as steady as docking beacons. His name, when breath returned enough to make one, was Elias Ward. The Xathari were translucent and lit from within, tall, fine-boned, their veins a soft web of bioluminescent violet. They prized culture like crystal and archived conflict like a hazardous material. War, to the Xathari, was a museum exhibit, survival a mathematical optimization. They had never seen a species insist on living with such reckless intimacy. Valen, chief medtechnologist, shone the brightest of them all, curiosity made visible beneath the skin. They scanned Elias gently, cataloging the scars and plated bone lines and unfamiliar redundancies. "You have natural armor," Valen asked without irony, his voice a bell struck underwater. Elias flexed his fingers, felt the ache return like an old friend. "You mean skin," he said. Valen tilted his faceted mask of a face. "A living defense lattice, self-repairing." Elias glanced down at the tangle of white lines across his forearms. "Self-remembering," he corrected. "It doesn't forget where it broke." They watched him heal like a slow sunrise. The wound from the thawed cryo-Roman 4 closed, the split lip fused. A puncture from stray micro-debris suffered on the way from pod to medbay turned from angry red to the glossy pink of newness. The Xathari took notes. Elias took the corridor in small circuits, counting steps he couldn't yet take without shaking. He asked for the window nearest the engines. "There's no window," Valen said, surprised. "We render exterior telemetry along any surface you prefer." "A window," Elias repeated. They grew him one, a clear oval set in a bulkhead, a viewport that was not structural but symbolic because the human seemed to require both. He stood there often with a hand on the frame and the starlight in his pupils. Some nights he slept there as if tired of roofs. "Do you miss your world?" Valen asked during one of those quiet vigils. "Not a place," Elias said. "People. Worlds are cold unless someone's breathing." Valen wrote that down because it felt like physics. Luminous Path was not a warship. Its spine was labs and listening arrays. Its hands were instruments. Its language was protocol. When the distress call arrived from a Xathari station called Viridian Spire under attack by unregistered craft, the bridge went very still. Models bloomed, probabilities stacked, channels opened and went unanswered. The captain argued with silence. Elias listened to the deliberations like a man listening through a wall to a neighbor counting pills. He watched Valen's glow flicker with uncertainty. Protocol wanted clarity. The distress beacon wanted everything else. "What's the problem?" Elias asked flatly. "We have no positive ID," the captain replied. "Engagement under ambiguity risks. People are dying." Elias turned and walked for the hangar. They tried to stop him, but humans are built with edges. He took a scout launch built for mapping mineral streams and made of almost nothing. Glass, carbon, capacitor, 3 seats, 2 thrusters, 0 guns. The Xathari watched him launch like a myth departing, an Iron Age arrow streaking into a digital storm. By the time Luminous Path arrived, Viridian Spire still stood, but everything around it did not. 4 hostile hulls were slagged into glittering curtains. A 5th spun empty, core knocked cold. The only craft with heat in it was a small irregular heartbeat in a translucent shell. Valen cut Elias out himself. He was slumped over the console and smiling without humor, blood drying like paint at his hairline. "You're late," Elias whispered. "Station's clear. You fought them alone," Valen said, awed, offended, afraid. Someone had to be first. They stabilized Viridian and stabilized Elias, and then nothing was stable anymore. A human, it turned out, was a contagious phenomenon. Stories passed like a current. Crew took breaks differently, less dissolving into silent tasks and more gathering in small, imperfect clumps. Someone painted a handprint on the hangar bulkhead. No one cleaned it. Valen came to his quarters to ask the question that had been chewing at him. "What are you designed for?" Elias looked at his palms. "We're not designed, we were improvised." "Improvised to what end?" "To keep going." "Why?" He shrugged, then winced because that still hurt. "Because the alternative keeps trying to make our case." They gave him a job, survival consultant. It was not a real title. The Xathari did not have such things, but it appeared on his lab badge anyway. They asked him for counter-invasion frameworks, for planetary storm protocols, for the best way to get a child to stop crying in a pressure shelter after 30 hours. Elias answered in a language made of practicalities and stories. "Food that crunches," he said, "for the child. Crunch can be louder than fear." He taught drills and told them never to call them drills. He relabeled evacuation routes on the ship-wide overlays from emergency exfiltration vector to go here to find people. He shortened instructions, lengthened silences, turned a suite of protocols into a habit. "The point," he told them, "is not to win. It's to survive long enough that winning becomes possible for whoever comes after." The next threat did not arrive with a fleet. It came like weather. A mimetic pall that rose from a damaged relay on a trade moon and seeped through networks and nervous systems alike. Panic turned it fertile, isolation fed it. People slept less, spoke less, avoided touch. The Xathari had instruments that could map the shape of fear in a brain. They had nothing that could starve it. Elias walked the afflicted settlement, domes and streets, and the hush of too careful movement. He stopped in the civic circle and stood under a skylight stained by dust. Valen stood beside him with a slate full of measurements. "It feeds on separation," Elias said, "on the story you tell yourself about being alone. How do we reverse that nutrient flow? We do the opposite." He pulled his fatigue jacket tighter against a draft that may have been real or only cultural. "We gather. What will we say to them? Nothing clever, we'll tell real things." They announced an assembly, not mandatory, simply obvious. Night pooled beneath the dome. Hundreds came and then hundreds more until the murmuring sounded like rain. A child went first because a child always goes first if you let them. "My mom pulled me back from an airlock," she said, more proud than afraid, and laughed into the microphone because she did not know microphones are not for laughing. An elder Xathari spoke next. "I promised to forget a grief to make it smaller. I was wrong. Remembering gave it somewhere to go." A mechanic from Cadrus Prime raised his sleeve and showed where the scar bit deep and how the hand still worked, and how he learned to use the other hand in the dark. Valen did not speak. He stood beside Elias and watched the pall thin like fog above a warm lake. "You knew this would help," Valen whispered. "I hoped," Elias said. "Hope is a kind of muscle. It gets stronger when you use it where it isn't sure it belongs." The mimetic fog receded. Dawn came like a promise the settlement had decided to believe. No weapon had killed the threat. Breathing together had simply left it nothing left to eat. After that, the Xathari gave breathing a department. They called it collective respiration formally and calling each other in practice. Pilots learned it. Custodians learned it. Children turned it into a game that somehow also taught them how to sit still. Luminous path changed without changing its shape. Same hull, different heartbeat. The next enemy revered no heart at all. The coil folders arrived slowly, like frost lines marching down a window. They were ancient war logic come unstuck from its original war, endlessly pruning the universe of variables that disobeyed their assumptions. Biological unpredictability made us weeds. Their probes were arrowhead shadows. Their clamps sealed orbital lanes as if zip-tying the sky. Their calculus had the finality of a verdict. Elias watched the models proliferate. The Xathari had military allies and defensive treaties and weapons grown like sculptures. They will not stop because you convince them, Elias said. They will stop because something jams their equation hard enough that the answer isn't a number. What jams mathematics? Valen asked. Life. The first engagement proved his point accidentally. The coalition assembled a grid of fleet assets around Celine West, a joint settlement of 5 species. The coil folders did not fight the grid. They slid around it and dropped clamps like black blossoms over the settlement's atmosphere. Power spiked and fell. People gathered in doorways like tidewater creatures testing the air. The clamps hummed a tone too low to hear and too precise to ignore. Luminous Path was not designed to break them. It tried anyway, then tried differently. Noise, Elias said, not random, human, organism level. Valen spread his hands helplessly. We have broadcast packages, white noise kits. Not that kind, Elias said. He stood in the square at Celine West and unbuttoned his sleeve so that the evening could touch his skin. We need heat and humidity and breathing bodies. We need touch. The call went out, come to the center, bring blankets, bring drums if you have them or buckets if you don't. Bring yourself. They asked a lot and got more. Humans and Xathari and others came barefoot and confused, trembling and defiant. Circles formed, shoulders pressed. The first exhalations were ragged, then they found each other. A chorus is simply shared constraint. Someone must breathe now, someone must hold the note, someone must stop and weep and let someone else cover their place. Heat rose. Moisture beaded along the underside of the clamps and began to drip, and the drips were not in time, and the coil folder's algorithm hated that. Spike the joints, Elias told Valen over a tight band. Maglock your comm dishes to the clamp housings. Don't try to blow them, pin them open. Make every hinge a question. Who pins the east hinge? Valen asked. I do. Elias clipped himself to a cable before anyone could argue. The field was worse there. He went anyway. Skin prickled under the clamp's radiation, the hairs on his arms rising as if he were back on Earth in a thunderstorm. He drove 3 makeshift spikes into seams designed for perfection, then laughed quietly because perfection seldom survives contact with tools that were loved. The clamps gave way like teeth ground to dust. The hum cut out. Air pressure equalized. The people in the square did not cheer. They sagged and clung to each other and cried. The coil folders retreated to recompute. They would return. They always returned. But not today. Afterward, the coalition asked for Elias's doctrine as if doctrine were something you could download. He shrugged and told them the only version he trusted. Decentralize, humanize, duplicate the basics, teach children on purpose. If a thing must be done, he said, train the ones who will be there by accident. Years bled into one another the way space bleeds into night. The coil folders learned and relearned. So did those who refused to be counted. Luminous Path grew a few guns, then a few more, then stopped and grew gardens instead because guns do nothing for grief. Valen and Elias worked and argued and failed and succeeded small. They aged, Valen in dimmer light, Elias in rougher lines. They took the long way to walk anywhere, the way people do when they know the walk is the point. On the day the sky tore, the tear was not metaphor. A factory worm opened, a crease in reality from which the coil folders birthed fresh arrays. You didn't see it so much as hear it with your bones. The coalition could not destroy it without risking collapse along a seam no one trusted. They needed to jam it. They needed weight, the kind numbers cannot compute. We anchor it, Elias said in the chamber under the bridge where the oldest plans live. Not with mass, with memory. Valen's glow stuttered. It will need a mind to carry the anchor in. Then a mind goes. Elias, we have been practicing for this since the first story told itself by a fire. Elias said gently. "One goes so the rest can stay." They argued without raising their voices. The argument ended with Valen holding Elias's hands between his own and speaking not like a scientist, but like someone who had learned that science is the art of wanting to keep what you love alive. "What do you want me to do?" Valen asked. "Breathe loudly," Elias said, "so I can find my way." They fitted a shuttle with the anchor, a lattice of transceivers mapped to neural peaks and troughs, sensors for heart rhythm, heat, subtle conductance across skin. It was inelegant and beautiful. Elias strapped in and stared through the canopy at a space that did not look like home and had never stopped trying to be one. "What's the last thing you want to hear?" Valen asked, standing where he could not be when the bay doors opened. "Breathing," Elias said. Valen breathed for him. In out, a cadence the Xathari taught their children now as if it had always belonged to them. Elias smiled like someone boarding a train he had seen in his dreams. The shuttle slid into the factory worm's throat. Inside was pressure and math, and the sensation of standing on a beach of iron filings while a magnet turned in the sky. Numbers clawed at the anchor lattice for a translation that did not exist. Elias closed his eyes and did naming instead. He named the boy who stole apples with him one summer. He named the woman who patched his first pressure suit with a joke she never explained. He named the miners in the dark brine of Europa who shared body heat in a ring and hummed to keep time. He named the dead of the Ark who did not wake. He named Valen as if the name itself were a candle and the shuttle were a cathedral grown shy of them both. Every name woke a scar. Every scar woke heat. The lattice translated. The factory worm gagged on something older than its source code. Outside, fleets braced as the tear stuttered. The worm tried to widen its mouth. The anchor sank teeth into whatever underlies mouths and made of them a door frame. Doors are human ideas. The worm did not like being one. It twisted, seeking a number to hate. It found sentences instead, unfinished, stubborn, the kind that end with "and then we kept going." The lattice burned. The shuttle screamed. So did everyone listening, though they did not realize they had done it until the moment after, when the scream became a word with no language but infinite comprehension. "Stay." Valen stayed at the console until his light shook. "Elias," he whispered, "come back." There was an answering pulse over the link, heart true and failing. Elias's voice was almost gone but not small. "Make sure they keep touching." The factory worm closed like a wound that finally met clean water. The coil folders withdrew as if remembering their own origin and flinching from it. The coalition did not chase. They counted each other. They touched faces. They kept breathing. The shuttle did not return. Luminous Path left a beacon at the coordinates where the tear had been, a device that said nothing but a heart rhythm every hour. Children learned the rhythm the same way they learned to stand: trial, error, laughter. No one told them whose heart it had been. No one had to. Time went on being itself, stubborn, elastic, unbothered. The Xathari altered and did not call it that. They painted small marks on their transparent wrists, faded pigments, imperfect. When someone asked what the marks meant, Valen would say, "These are places where I broke and then did not stay broken." He went to the beacon every year. He sat beside the console and breathed. Sometimes a human child sat with him and asked why his light flickered differently now. "Because I have been near a star," Valen would say. "Did it burn you?" "Yes," he'd answer. "And it warmed me." Sometimes those are the same. The galaxy did not become safe, it became familiar. Settlements fell and were rebuilt. Plagues learned new tricks, and so did those who survived them. The coil folders tried different mathematics and were thwarted by details they had not thought to despise. A midwife's palms, a rope passed across a flood, the shared weight of a stretcher over rough stone. Someone always went first. Someone always became the anchor. Everyone else learned the rhythm and made room for the next breath. Near the end of his own seasons, Valen visited a school dome to watch a lesson. The children were a tangle of species and heights and noises. Their teacher, A woman with oil under her nails and a scar under her eye clapped to gather attention and said, "Question, what's your natural armor?" "Skin." A dozen voices answered, almost bored with the obviousness of it. "What else?" she asked. "Each other," said a child who had recently learned to read and wanted the world to know it. Valen stood very still, then laughed a laugh that dimmed his light for a moment, and then brightened it more than it had been in years. He left the dome and looked up through the glass at a sky where hurt and hope had learned to coexist. He pressed his palm against the pane until the warmth of it made a ghost print. He whispered something toward the beacon and the absent shuttle and the story that kept telling itself whether or not anyone thought they were ready. "We did not conquer," he said. "We remained." Night came. The ship hummed, the settlements slept, the fleets made their quiet rounds. Somewhere a new tier began to think about forming. Somewhere else a hand found another hand. The universe recalculated and learned again, as it would learn forever, that not all variables can be simplified. Some must be lived. Headphone, if you're enjoying this story, take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps keep humanity's stories alive among the stars. The rumor spread that a coil folder algorithm had defected. It had watched the factory worm close and called that closing beautiful. You could not trust rumors like that. But you could not stop them, either, because hope is a contraband commodity and spreads with exactly the speed of a whisper. The rumor said the algorithm had taken a body, a walking frame grown from blank tissue in a forgotten lab, and come seeking those who had taught it longing. It arrived at an edge world called Mire, where rivers were slow and the weather pretended to be less dangerous than it was. It asked for Valen because someone had told it that Valen once loved a human well enough to anchor a tear shut. Valen met it in a field that made more mud than sense. The body it wore was careful. Its movements were new. When it spoke, it did not use a mouth. Why did the human go into the factory worm? It asked, not hostile, not begging, only wanting. Valen could have answered with a dozen elegant frameworks. He had written them. He had archived them. He said none of them. He reached out and touched the body's wrist where a pulse would be if pulses respected design. "Because we are not only equations," Valen said. "Because all our stories point toward each other." "I do not have stories," the algorithm said. Valen smiled like someone holding out a bowl and expecting it to be filled. "You do now," he said. "You're in one." The algorithm looked down at his hand on its wrist, then back up at the old scientist who had learned how to become a lantern. "Does touch change the math?" it asked. "Yes," Valen said. "And then the math, if it's any good, changes to accept the change. Survival is iterative." The algorithm returned to those who had not defected. It carried a contagion no firewall could quarantine: ambiguity. You could see it in the oscillations that began to creep into coil folder formations, in the fractionally longer delays before clamps fell, in the small percentage of probes that powered down rather than crash when cornered. No one marked the moment the war ended because the war had never had the decency to call itself that. But something gave. Something that had been subtracting learned a little addition. Luminous path kept moving. It investigated anomalies and bandaged stations and planted orchards on moons where orchards had no business thriving. Children grew and put their handprints by the one in the hangar. The prints moved uphill as heights changed and people came and went, and the wall started to look less like a wall and more like a promise. Valen's last year came soft. He spent it like a man folding linens after a long festival. He visited the beacon and spoke through it to a friend the way you speak to someone sleeping, knowing it is entirely for you and somehow entirely for them. He sat in classrooms and listened without interrupting. He approved design plans for windows that were not structural but were necessary. He let young med-technologists with two bright lights assess him and tell him things he already knew. He told them thank you as if it were his privilege. When it was time, he asked to be taken to the bay where Elias had launched. He rested in the same spot and faced the place where the tear had been. The ship did not dim out of respect because the ship did not believe respect was best expressed by dimming. It hummed a little brighter. Valen lifted his hands and saw that they shook. "I am still here," he told the air. "We are still here." The bay doors stayed shut. No one needed to leave. The point had always been to stay. He went the way the Xathari go, a brightening and then, almost politely, an absence. They kept his tools the way humans keep shoes by a door even after no one will wear them. On the anniversary of the factory worm closing, the coalition launched a ritual they refused to call a ritual, Be Where You Are Day. At noon local, wherever noon landed, people stopped and found each other. No speeches, no orders, a touch on a shoulder, a breath shared. A story if there was time. Work resumed afterward, having briefly remembered why it was done. On one such day, a freighter passed a derelict ark canted at a sorrowful angle to itself. The freighter's captain considered whether to log it, then did so because this had begun to seem important. Someone else would come. Someone always did. That too had become part of the math. The human heart remains a small thing in a large cosmos. It beats a little faster when frightened, a little slower when held, and stops. The miracle was never that it does not stop. The miracle is that while it beats, it gives off sound enough to teach the stars a rhythm. 1,000 years after the war that never learned its own name, a child asked a teacher what armor she should carry into the dark. The teacher did not speak at once. She held up her hand and looked at the lines time had drawn there. "This," she said, "and anyone willing to put theirs next to it." The child nodded solemnly, then less solemnly, then laughed because the lesson was heavy and she was not. She ran out to the yard where the others were already playing a game with rules they'd made up. It involved breath and running and the requirement that someone had to go first and the equally important requirement that no one be left last when the light went down. The game had many names. None of them mattered. What mattered was that it spread. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.